Someone get this woman a clipboard and a seat in the back. We need a real soldier for this demonstration, not a secretary." The words, sharp and dripping with condescension, echoed in the cavernous gymnasium. The crowd, a mix of uniformed personnel and foreign military dignitaries, reacted with a ripple of uneasy chuckles and nervous coughs. Captain Marcus Thorne, puffed with the self-importance of a man who had read every manual but understood none of them, smirked as if he'd just delivered a devastatingly witty remark. He stood center-mat, the architect of this public humiliation, his eyes scanning the bleachers for a more suitable, more masculine, more visibly intimidating volunteer. The target of his insult, Sergeant Major Evelyn Reed, offered no reaction. Her face remained a placid mask of professional neutrality. She didn't flinch, didn't sigh, didn't even meet his gaze. Instead, her attention was fixed on the task at hand, her fingers methodically checking the tension of the clasps on a training vest, her movements economical and precise. Her uniform was crisp but unremarkable, the fabric softened from countless washes. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun, and her posture, while perfectly aligned, lacked the aggressive, chest-out bearing of men like Thorne. To him, she was background scenery, an administrative fixture who had wandered into the wrong room. He saw a functionary, a support role, not a warrior. He failed to notice the details that would have screamed a warning to a more experienced eye. The faint, web-like pattern of old scars across her knuckles, visible only when the light caught them just right. The way her eyes, a pale and piercing gray, didn't just look but scanned, assessing angles, exits, and potential threats with an ingrained, subconscious vigilance. He didn't see the subtle wear on the soles of her boots, indicative not of parade, ground marching, but of thousands of hours of dynamic, unbalanced movement. He saw a woman. He saw a clerk. He saw a prop. But in the front row, seated amongst the visiting generals, General Davies, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts, leaned forward ever so slightly. His gaze bypassed the preening captain entirely and settled on the quiet sergeant major. He saw her stance, the way her weight was perfectly centered, her feet planted with the subtle grounding of a deeply rooted tree. He saw the profound, unnerving calm in her stillness, a calm he hadn't seen in 20 years, not since a sand-choked night in a fallen city where a ghost with gray eyes had moved through chaos like a whisper, leaving silence and stability in her wake. A flicker of disbelief, then dawning recognition, crossed the general's face. The captain was a fool, and he was about to learn a lesson that wasn't in any field manual. If you believe competence speaks louder than arrogance, type silence below. Captain Thorne, emboldened by what he perceived as her meek submission, pressed his advantage. The initial wave of nervous laughter had validated his assessment, and he was determined to solidify his authority in front of the assembled brass and international observers. "Seriously, Sergeant," he boomed, gesturing dismissively with a sweep of his hand that was meant to encompass her entire, inadequate presence. "I requested a demonstration subject from the Combat Arms School. Someone with a bit of grit. Someone who's actually seen the inside of a C-130 from the jump door, not just filed its maintenance reports. Is this really the best you could find for me?" The insult was layered, a deliberate jab at her perceived non-combatant status, her gender, and her rank, which he had already mentally demoted. The senior non-commissioned officers scattered throughout the audience shifted uncomfortably. They exchanged glances that spoke volumes, a shared language of frustration forged over decades of dealing with arrogant young officers who mistook their newly minted bars for a crown. They knew the type. All theory, no practice. All talk, no shock. They saw the quiet professionalism in the sergeant major, even if they didn't know her specific history, and they felt a collective, vicarious sting from Thorne's public derision. Yet, Evelyn Reed remained an island of tranquility in a roiling sea of social tension. She finished her equipment check, the final click of a buckle echoing with startling clarity in the charged atmosphere. She straightened up, her 5'7" frame seeming to possess a density and presence that belied her unassuming build, and finally looked directly at Captain Thorne. Her expression was utterly neutral, a blank slate on which he could project all his own insecurities. "Ready for the demonstration, sir," she said. Her voice was even pitched at a conversational level, yet it carried across the gymnasium floor with perfect clarity. There was no tremor of fear, no hint of anger, no trace of insubordination. It was the simple, professional statement of a subordinate ready to follow a lawful order, and its very placidity was more unnerving to Thorne than any shouted retort could ever have been. It was a silence that refused to acknowledge his power, a calm that denied him the satisfaction of a reaction. This demonstration was Thorne's baby, a showcase for a new, aggressive close-quarters combat system he had been tasked with evaluating. He was the project lead, the self-proclaimed expert, and he intended to use this anonymous sergeant as a passive training dummy to display his own supposed mastery of the techniques. He unholstered a bright blue training pistol, the inert plastic looking like a toy in his hand, and savored the feel of its grip, the weight of the authority it represented in this controlled environment. The squeak of his polished boots on the vinyl mat, the low, expectant murmur of the crowd, the cool, conditioned air of the gymnasium. It was all his stage, his moment. And he had chosen his supporting actress perfectly, or so he believed. He saw her as a stepping stone for his career, a compliant object for his demonstration. He had no idea he was the one who was truly the prop, a tool about to be used by circumstance to teach a master class in humility. Goaded by her impenetrable calm, Captain Thorne decided to escalate. Her silence was no longer passive. It felt like a challenge, a quiet judgment he couldn't abide. He would break that composure. He would make her an example, not just of the technique, but of the proper military hierarchy. "Fine," he snapped, his voice tight with irritation. "Let's get this over with. On your feet, soldier. Let's see if you can even stand at attention properly." He gestured impatiently to the center of the mat. He would begin with the most basic drill imaginable, a simple weapon retention defense. It was a drill taught to raw recruits in their first week, a rudimentary technique he felt was beneath his station to even demonstrate, but perfectly suited to exposing the incompetence of a secretary playing soldier. The condescension was thick enough to taste. Evelyn Reed moved without hesitation, stepping to the designated spot. The way she settled into her ready stance was the first clue for the truly initiated. It wasn't the stiff, formal posture from the training manuals Thorne so dearly loved. Her knees were slightly bent, her center of gravity low and coiled. She was perfectly balanced on the balls of her feet, a study in potential energy, ready to spring in any direction. It was the stance of a predator, not a victim, a subtle but profound deviation from the textbook that Thorne, in his ignorance, completely missed. The narrator's eye, however, could see what he could not. Her simple uniform belt, which Thorne had dismissed, was now revealed to be a rigger's belt, set up for ambidextrous access to concealed equipment, a detail only relevant to those who operated in the most dangerous and unpredictable environments. Her hands, which she now held loosely at her sides, were not the soft hands of an office worker. She flexed her fingers once, a small, unconscious motion, and the gesture revealed the dense, conditioned knuckles and sinewy strength of a lifelong practitioner of violent, intimate arts. This was not the body of a clerk. It was a finely honed weapon, polished by decades of relentless, unforgiving practice. Thorne, meanwhile, played to the crowd, his voice adopting a professorial tone as he explained the scenario with agonizing simplicity. "The first and most critical principle of close-quarters engagement," he began, pontificating for the benefit of the dignitaries, "is maintaining positive control of your primary weapon system. An untrained opponent," he said, and here he paused, gesturing with a blue pistol directly at Reed, his contempt a palpable force, will often attempt a simple, desperate grab. The proper response is to immediately create space, break the grip using leverage, and neutralize the threat. Like so, he squared his shoulders, preparing to launch his attack on the motionless woman before him. The atmosphere in the gymnasium shifted. The low murmur of the crowd died away. replaced by a blanket of suspense. The focus narrowed, pulling in from the vast room to the small circle of matting where the two figures stood. The narrative lens zoomed in on Reed. Her breathing was invisible, slow and rhythmic. Her gaze, her unervingly calm gray eyes, were not locked on Thorne's face or his condescending sneer. They were fixed on a point just below his sternum, his center of gravity, the fulcrum upon which his entire body balanced. For her, in that moment, the world contracted and slowed to a crawl. The fluorescent lights, the silent crowd, the arrogant captain, they were all just variables in a complex but predictable equation she had solved 1,000 times before. He thought he was initiating a drill. She knew he was initiating the end of his own arrogance. The moment arrived. With a surge of theatrical aggression, Captain Thorne lunged. His movement was precisely what he had practiced. Fast, committed, and aimed directly at the training pistol holstered on Reed's right hip. His hand clamped down on the grip, his intention to rip it from her control in a demonstration of superior strength and technique. It was a textbook move, executed with the clean, predictable lines of a diagram in a manual. And for Evelyn Reed, that predictability was the fatal flaw. In a motion that was less a reaction and more an effortless unfolding, she did not resist. She did not pull back or try to anchor the weapon. Instead, she flowed with the vector of his force, becoming one with his momentum. As he pulled, she pivoted on the ball of her left foot, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift that turned his linear attack into a rotational one. His own lunge carried him past her, his balance suddenly and catastrophically compromised. In that split second of instability, her left hand, moving in a liquid blur, did not strike his hand to break the grip. It gently cupped his wrist, not to fight him, but to guide him, ensuring his momentum continued along the path she had chosen. Simultaneously, her right hand, free and unseen, traced a swift, precise arc, the heel of her palm connecting with the brachial plexus nerve cluster at the side of his neck. There was no sound, no brutish impact, just a quiet, devastatingly accurate application of anatomical knowledge. An explosion of pure, white-hot static erupted down Thorne's arm. His grip vanished. His fingers uncurled involuntarily as the limb went completely numb and useless. The blue training pistol, the symbol of his authority, clattered harmlessly onto the mat. Before the shock of a nerve strike could even fully register in his brain, before he could process the loss of his weapon or the sudden emptiness in his hand, Reed had already transitioned. She had used his own forward momentum to step behind him, her body a whisper of movement. One of her hands came to rest lightly on the back of his neck, her thumb finding the pressure point at the base of his skull, while her other arm effortlessly controlled his now limp, dangling arm. He was locked, immobilized, and utterly, completely helpless. The entire sequence, from his lunge to his capture, had taken less than a second. A deafening, absolute silence fell over the gymnasium. It was a physical thing, a heavy blanket of pure shock that smothered all other sounds. The foreign attaches were on their feet, leaning over the railings, their professional military composure shattered and replaced with wide-eyed disbelief. The junior soldiers in the stands looked at each other with mouths agape, as if they had just witnessed a law of physics being casually broken. And in the back rows, the senior NCOs were no longer hiding their expressions. Broad, slow smiles of profound, hard-earned vindication spread across their faces. Thorne, trapped and powerless, tried to struggle, but Reed's control was absolute, achieved with the bare minimum of effort. It wasn't a contest of strength. It was a matter of superior geometry and leverage. All his academy training, all his manual-based knowledge, evaporated into a cloud of confusion and pain. He could only manage a strangled, disbelieving whisper, "Ow!" As gently and efficiently as she had taken control, she released him. She gave him a slight nudge forward, forcing him to stumble to regain his balance. She then calmly bent down, retrieved the fallen training pistol, performed a practiced, instinctive press check on the inert weapon, and reholstered it on her own belt. Turning back to the utterly broken captain, she resumed her perfect, neutral stance. With no trace of triumph, no hint of emotion in her voice, she repeated her earlier statement, the words now dripping with an irony so thick it was almost suffocating. "Ready to continue the demonstration, sir?" The spell of stunned silence was shattered not by a voice, but by a sound. It was the slow, deliberate, and resonant sound of two hands clapping. One person, then another, then a dozen, then the entire gymnasium, minus one humiliated captain, erupted. General Davies was on his feet in the front row, his weathered face not smiling, but etched with a look of profound and solemn respect. His applause was not for a clever trick. It was an acknowledgement of mastery, a salute from one professional to another across the expanse of the mat and the gulf of their ranks. As he rose, the rest of the audience, shaken from their collective stupor, surged to their feet, the applause swelling into a thunderous, rolling ovation that washed over the gymnasium. It wasn't just for the display of skill. It was a release of pent-up tension, a celebration of the sudden, righteous inversion of power they had just witnessed. In that moment, Captain Marcus Thorne became the loneliest man in the world. The warmth of the crowd's earlier sycophantic laughter was now a distant, mocking memory. He was an island of humiliation, the focus of 1,000 pairs of eyes that now saw him not as an authority figure, but as a fool. He stumbled back a step, instinctively rubbing his still tingling, useless arm, his face a kaleidoscope of conflicting emotions, confusion, the phantom pain of the nerve strike, and the dawning, sickening horror of his monumental miscalculation. He stared at Sergeant Major Reed, as if seeing her for the very first time, the image of the meek secretary shattering into a million pieces, replaced by the terrifying reality of the woman standing calmly before him. General Davies let the applause continue for a long moment before raising a hand to cut it short. Silence once again descended, this time one of reverence and anticipation. He didn't bother to glance at the broken captain. With measured, deliberate steps, he walked from his front row seat up the small set of stairs and onto the demonstration mat. He moved with the quiet authority of a man who had commanded armies, his presence alone shifting the entire dynamic of the room. He walked directly to Evelyn Reed and stopped a precise, respectful distance from her. He didn't speak. He simply looked her in the eyes, and in that shared gaze, a silent conversation took place. The narrator could almost hear it. A history of shared hardship, of missions that existed only in redacted after-action reports, of a bond forged in fire and shadow, where survival depended on the quiet competence of the person next to you. Then, the general executed the ultimate gesture of validation. He brought his right hand up in a slow, perfectly crisp salute. It was not the casual, perfunctory gesture an officer gives a subordinate. It was the deep, formal salute of a soldier to a superior, not in rank, but in stature. It was a sign of immense, personal respect, a public deference that spoke louder than any words. "It's good to see you on your feet, Sergeant Major." The general's voice boomed, clear and strong, filling the silent hall. The title, Sergeant Major, landed like a physical blow. To the uninitiated, it was a senior NCO rank. But to Thorne, who had been sneeringly calling her Sergeant, and to every other soldier in the room, the distinction was a chasm. It was the difference between a mid-level supervisor and the most senior, respected, and often most feared enlisted leader in a command. It was the first hammerfall of his public dismantling. General Davies held his salute until Reed returned it with a brief, professional nod. He then turned his steely gaze toward his aide-de-camp, a young captain standing nervously at the edge of the mat. "Captain," the general commanded, his voice leaving no room for discussion, "bring me Sergeant Major Reed's personnel file from the vault. The unredacted version. Authorization, Davies, Omega-7." The aide went pale. The phrase Omega-7 was not a standard security clearance. It was a code word, a piece of esoteric jargon known only at the highest echelons, signifying a level of classification that dealt with matters of life, death, and national security that were never committed to standard records. The aide didn't question it. He simply snapped to attention, uttered a clipped, "Yes, General," and practically ran from the gymnasium. A fresh wave of murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. If the demonstration was shocking, this new development was seismic. They were about to be given a glimpse behind a curtain they never even knew existed. The aide returned moments later, moving with a speed born of terror and awe, clutching a single, thin black folder with no markings save for a stark, diagonal red line. He handed it to the general with a trembling hand, avoiding eye contact with everyone. General Davies took the folder, his movements deliberate. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he walked slowly toward the still reeling Captain Thorne, stopping directly in front of him. The general's voice, when he finally spoke, was not loud. It was far more terrifying. It was quiet, cold, and as precise as a surgeon's scalpel, each word designed to methodically dissect Thorne's arrogance and ignorance in front of the world. He opened the folder. Name, Evelyn Reed. Rank, Command Sergeant Major. He began, letting the proper title hang in the air for a moment. He looked up from the page, his eyes boring into Thorne. Unit, he continued, his voice dropping slightly. Formerly assigned to Joint Special Operations Command Task Force 11. Mission portfolio is classified. Another deliberate pause, allowing the weight of the most elite secretive command in the military to settle over the room. Primary specialty listed as asymmetric warfare, direct action, and sensitive personnel extraction. We'll just call it that for now. He flipped a page, his expression grim. Combat deployments, 17. All locations are redacted. He then began to list her accomplishments in a clipped, staccato rhythm that hit Thorne like a series of body blows. Awards: the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Bronze Star for Valor with 6 oak leaf clusters, the Purple Heart. Here, the general paused, lifting his gaze to meet Thorne's directly. With 9 oak leaf clusters, a collective gasp went through the audience. 9. 9 separate times she had been wounded in action and returned to the fight. The sheer number was staggering, a testament to a career spent at the very tip of the spear. The general closed the folder with a soft, final snap. She is also Captain, the senior lead instructor and final certifying authority for the Tier 1 Close Quarters Combat Program. The very system you were so clumsily attempting to demonstrate. She didn't just learn the manual, Captain Thorne. She wrote it. She has more logged hours in live-fire, hand-to-hand combat scenarios than you have total hours in uniform. The general took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. You asked for a real soldier, Captain. Standing before you is not just a real soldier. She is a living legend whose actions have shaped the very battlefield you've only read about. In this room, on this mat, by every meaningful measure of experience, sacrifice, and lethal competence, she outranks everyone present, myself included. From this moment forward, you will address her as Sergeant Major. Is that understood? Thorne, utterly broken, could only manage a weak, trembling nod, his world completely and irrevocably shattered. The story of what happened in the gymnasium that afternoon did not just spread, it detonated. It moved through the base's communication channels, secure texts, hushed conversations in chow halls, late-night retellings in the barracks, with the speed and intensity of a shockwave. Every soldier, from the greenest private to the most seasoned colonel, heard some version of the tale. The details shifted and grew with each telling, as they do in the creation of all great legends. In some versions, she disarmed 10 men. In others, she did it blindfolded. But the core elements, the immutable truths of the story, remained the same. The arrogant captain, the quiet sergeant major, the impossible takedown, and the 4-star general's public rebuke. The incident became an instant piece of institutional folklore, a modern-day fable with a clear and potent moral. The ripple effects were immediate and profound. The delegation of foreign attaches, who had come to see a simple technology demonstration, were now furiously rewriting their reports. Their focus shifted from the CQC system itself to the Reed method and the enigmatic woman who embodied it. They flooded General Davies's office with requests for private briefings, eager to understand the training doctrine that could produce such a quietly formidable operator. For the junior soldiers who had witnessed the event firsthand, the world had fundamentally changed. They began to look at every quiet, unassuming senior NCO with a newfound sense of wonder and respect, suddenly aware that the person packing their parachute, signing their leave form, or serving them food might be carrying a hidden history of heroism that would dwarf their own. The age-old assumption that quiet equated to weakness was shattered in a single, silent, one-second maneuver. But the most significant transformation was in Captain Marcus Thorne. He was not court-martialed or formally reprimanded in a way that would end his career. General Davies and Sergeant Major Reed understood that a broken officer was useless. A humbled one, however, could be remade into something far stronger. A few days after the incident, Thorne sought out Reed. He found her not in an office, but where she was always most comfortable, alone in the pre-dawn darkness of the now-famous gymnasium. His approach was tentative, stripped of all its former swagger. His apology was not the carefully worded statement of a man trying to save his career, but the raw, genuine confession of a man who had been forced to confront his own profound ignorance. "Sergeant Major," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "I have no excuse. I was wrong. I was arrogant, and I was blinded by my own prejudice. What I did was unacceptable." He paused, taking a breath. "I would be honored if you would be willing to teach me. Truly teach me." Evelyn Reed, who was methodically stretching on the mat, stopped and looked at him. Her gray eyes held no malice, no triumph, only a calm, professional assessment. She simply nodded. "Training is at 0500 every morning, sir," she said, her tone matter of fact. "Be on the mat. Don't be late." It wasn't an offer of forgiveness. Forgiveness was irrelevant. It was an offer of purpose. Her mission was not to punish him, but to uphold a standard. The Army needed better officers, and she had just been presented with a uniquely teachable moment. Her quiet competence extended beyond combat. It was the foundation of her leadership, a philosophy that chose to build rather than destroy. The legacy of that day began to solidify, leaving a permanent and tangible mark on the institution's culture. The vinyl mat in the center of the base gymnasium, the stage for Thorne's humiliation and Reed's vindication, acquired a name. The NCOs started calling it Reed's mat, a term of respect spoken in hushed tones. Eventually, the base sergeant's major council, acting on its own initiative, installed a small, discreet brass plaque on the wall nearby. It was not an official commendation from high command. It was something more meaningful, a tribute from her peers. The plaque bore no grand descriptions of the event. It simply read, "Evelyn Reed, CSM. Competence is quiet. Let your actions be your voice." This simple phrase became a new mantra for the enlisted corps on the base, a quiet reminder of where true authority resides. A photograph, a grainy image snapped on a cell phone by an anonymous spectator at the precise, suspended moment Reed had Thorne utterly immobilized, soon began to circulate on secure military networks. The image was electric, a perfect visual encapsulation of the story. It showed her effortless control and his shocked helplessness. It became a viral meme within the military community, shared with captions like "Check your assumptions, the quiet part out loud," or, most often, the simple and damningly effective "Lesson learned." The photo was printed out and pinned to countless bulletin boards in company offices and team rooms, a silent warning to any leader who might forget to listen to their NCOs. The transformation of Marcus Thorne continued, witnessed by all. He became a fixture at the 0500 training sessions. Every morning, he was on Reed's mat, learning the hard way. He was thrown, choked, disarmed, and submitted hundreds of times. The physical toll a constant, painful reminder of his intellectual and moral failings. And after every grueling session, as he picked himself up off the mat, bruised and gasping for air, he would look at the sergeant major and say, with genuine gratitude, "Thank you, Sergeant Major." He was being systematically dismantled and rebuilt, reforged in the very fire of his own public disgrace. He became quieter, more observant, and profoundly humble. He started to truly listen to the experienced NCOs in his company, valuing their practical wisdom over his own theoretical knowledge. He was becoming the kind of officer the Army desperately needed. Through it all, Evelyn Reed remained unchanged. She treated Thorne with the same professional detachment she showed every other student. She never once mentioned the demonstration. She deflected any attempts at praise or discussion of the event, her focus always locked on the next task, the next soldier to train, the next problem to solve. Her legacy was not being built in the stories people told about her, but in the quiet, steady, and relentless improvement of the soldiers and leaders she mentored. She was not a monument. She was a craftsman, and her material was the fighting spirit of the United States Army. 5 years later, the ripples of that day had spread far and wide, carving new channels in the bedrock of military culture. Major Marcus Thorne, no longer the arrogant captain, was now a field-grade officer widely respected for two defining qualities: his tactical acumen and his profound humility. He was known as an officer who trusted his senior enlisted leaders implicitly, a commander who listened more than he spoke. To every fresh-faced lieutenant assigned to his command, he would recount the story of his own public shaming. He told it not as a self-deprecating anecdote, but as the single most important leadership lesson of his life. Never, ever assume you are the smartest person in the room, he would tell them, his voice filled with the gravity of hard-won wisdom. Never judge a soldier by their gender, their size, or how loud they talk. The quietest person in the formation is often the one carrying the most weight, the most knowledge, and the most scars. I learned that from a command sergeant major who could have destroyed my career with a single word, but chose to build it instead. She taught me that respect isn't on your uniform. It's what you earn when you're willing to get thrown on the mat 100 times and still say thank you. General Davies, now retired, had published his memoirs. In a chapter titled The Ghosts, he wrote at length about the quiet professionals of the special operations world, the operators like Evelyn Reed who were the true architects of modern warfare, their names and deeds forever hidden in classified archives. He described the incident at the demonstration as the perfect public illustration of their ethos. They require no external validation because their competence is an undeniable physical fact. Their silence is not an absence of confidence, but the ultimate expression of it, a weaponized calm that allows ego and chaos to defeat themselves. Evelyn Reed was still serving, her journey having taken her to the highest echelons of the Pentagon. She was now a senior enlisted advisor, shaping policy that would affect generations of soldiers. To the uninitiated, she still looked like an administrative assistant, quiet and unassuming in the sea of high-ranking officers. But in the high-stakes meetings in the war room, when the generals debated strategy and the fate of thousands hung in the balance, a unique protocol was observed. When the quiet command sergeant major with the piercing gray eyes chose to speak, everyone, from the newly minted brigadiers to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, would fall silent and listen. Her words were few, precise, and carried the immense weight of her experience. Her presence had subtly but irrevocably altered the culture of command, creating a space where demonstrated competence and ground truth were valued above political posturing and convenient theories. The narrator's final analysis is clear. This was never a story about a captain being put in his place. It was a story about the soul of an institution being tested and affirmed. It was a powerful, living reminder that true strength is never loud, that true authority is not granted by rank but earned by character, and that a true legacy is not a name carved on a memorial stone, but a standard of quiet, professional excellence that is painstakingly passed down from one soldier to the next in the silent hours before the dawn. The gymnasium stands today, a monument not of brick and mortar, but of principle. On the polished floor, on the mat that still bears her name, a new generation of soldiers moves through the intricate, violent ballet of close-quarters combat. The instructors, many of them trained by Reed herself or by her first disciples, teach with her same quiet intensity, their voices low and calm, their corrections precise and insightful. The lesson of that day has become more than a story. It has been integrated into doctrine, a core tenet of their training philosophy. The concept of outranking someone has been fundamentally redefined within these walls. It is no longer seen as a simple matter of the insignia pinned to a collar. The instructors teach their students that the true challenge is to outrank your own assumptions, to outrank your prejudices, to outrank your ego. Sergeant Major Evelyn Reed, they explain, did not just outrank a captain that day. She outranked a flawed, corrosive way of thinking, and in doing so, she made the entire institution stronger, healthier, and more lethal. Her initial silence was not a sign of weakness or passivity. It was a strategic choice. It was the profound calm that precedes a storm of undeniable competence, a quiet patience that gave arrogance enough rope to publicly hang itself. It was the ultimate demonstration of power, the power to control not only your opponent, but yourself. This narrative, while rooted in the specific culture of the military, transcends its setting. It is a universal anthem for every individual who has ever been underestimated, judged by their appearance, or dismissed by the loud and the ignorant. It is a testament to the enduring power of showing, not telling, of doing, not boasting. The quiet professionals are the foundation of any successful endeavor. They are in our hospitals, the unassuming nurses who notice the subtle signs a renowned surgeon might miss. They are in our classrooms, the quiet teachers who ignite a spark in a forgotten student. They are in our workshops, boardrooms, and laboratories, the ones who don't seek the spotlight because they're the ones who are busy making sure the lights work for everyone else. They are the architects of reality, while the arrogant are merely narrating their own fantasies. Their worth is not defined by applause, but by results. Their legacy is not in the stories told about them, but in the quiet, steady, and competent work that moves the world forward. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.